accents. I really like the accents of people who are European who learn to speak English at like a young age, but then have lived in like multiple European countries because they always have very interesting accents that have like just lots of things they picked up. Hello, sir. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Bruce. Welcome to the quiet place.
Oh my gosh.
Just messing around my
I'm like geeking out. Welcome to the show. We've got Bruce Coville on tonight, who's just like awesome, and we're all excited to have him.
Well,
That's great.
Really
I got them all. I've got them all, man. See? I got more around here somewhere. Author of the Space Brat series, the Aliens Ate My Homework series, My Teacher is an Alien series, Moongobble Me, Goblins in the Castle, the Dragonslayers. I mean, he's done it. He's done it all.
He's awesome.
Well, I've been around for a long time, you know.
And so let's like right out the bat. I mean, it's well over 100 books that you've written in your lifetime, right? I mean,
yeah. Well, there's also how many I've written and how many I've published. Which is why I always tell kids at school. They say, "How many books have you written?" I say, "I don't know," because there's a bunch of stuff that didn't get published. I published 105.
Yeah. Wow, that's cool. That's awesome, man.
Interactive, you know, so it's...
Yeah, it's good. It focuses you.
What I really always admired in your work, sir, was that you didn't talk down to young readers, but you talked up to them almost. You know, it's like you didn't condescend or dumb down your ideas. Like I think every kid gets it in My Teacher Flunked the Planet. When Broxholm violates intergalactic council, policy by intervening on like a CIA torture session or something, and he's invisible and observing with Peter and I think Duncan or Susan.
That's right. They're all through there. That's right.
Yeah. And he violates it by while he's invisible, he knocks the torturer out, and I mean he just gets emotional because he's seeing someone being tortured and helpless. And I mean, I think every young reader got that, and it made us think about humanity and Earth, and made us consider, should they push the button?
I'm back inside those books because I don't know if you know, I run an audiobook company in addition to other things, and which we use mostly full cast for. And we just recorded that scene last week, I think, maybe the week before. We're doing those books now in full cast audio.
Oh,
fantastic!
Nice.
That's interesting. That's very cool.
With audiobooks, do you think that they are still an untapped potential market, or are they a niche product?
Actually, at this point, they're literally an explosive market. Audio is one of the fastest growing aspects of publishing right now.
Yeah, I was at an online con over the weekend, and one of the things they talked about was how audiobooks are one of the largest growing sectors of the literary market right now.
Yep. They took off. They also took off during the pandemic. That gave them a boost. But they were growing already. It's just once people got over the impressions about, is that really reading a book? They found it was just a way to get more books into your life. You can listen to a book while you're driving, and listen while you're doing your housework. So if you are a book freak, as I assume everybody in this podcast is, books lets you do more reading because you can read at times that you wouldn't normally be reading.
Mm-hmm. So true. Yeah, and like some of my greatest memories are of like listening to audiobooks on long drives with my parents. It's such a great way to just like connect with someone and experience a book at the same time without having to rely on everybody in a book club to get there.
That's exactly how I fell in love with audio. About almost 40 years ago, I took a cross-country drive with my daughter, who was 14. And we said, we'll get in the car, we'll drive until we run to the ocean, then turn around and drive back to see what we can see. It takes 6 weeks.
Nice.
And I thought, okay, I'm going to be in a car for 6 weeks with a 14-year-old girl, which means a crazy person. So we went to the library and got a bunch of, because you couldn't buy audiobooks at that point. You could only get them in the library. You got a bunch of unabridged books. And I figured out a couple of things. One is that when you're driving across Kansas, Pride and Prejudice is riveting. And
Oh yeah.
actually, anything is riveting when you're driving around.
Yeah. Stock numbers.
There was a wonderful thing about this India. Nobody was in charge. It's kind of what you were talking about. So usually, I used to read to the kids all the time, but nobody was in charge. We experienced the story simultaneously. And when we stopped for lunch or dinner, that's what we talk about, is the story we've been reading, what we thought about it. And so I thought, wow, I love this. My book should be on audio.
Yeah, man.
So I stopped, again, this is like 40 years ago. That was one of those big conferences that writers go to, the American Library Association or American Booksellers or something like that. And Recorded Books was there. And I walked past the booth 2 or 3 times, getting up my nerve because I wasn't as ballsy as I am now. And I stopped and said, "You should get my books." And they said, "We should." And that's literally all it took. They gave me a magnificent 3-figure advance for each of 2 books.
Ooh. La-di-da. That's so cool, though.
One of the readings I was very unhappy with, was I thought, well, screw it. I like to perform. I'll start my own company. But I'm always, I've got this long list of coulda, woulda, shoulda, going to do this. But I got an inquiry for somebody else, Tim Ditlow at Listening Library, wanted to record one of the books. And I wrote back and said, I think I'm probably going to record it myself. And he wrote back and said, like, what are you, crazy? And I wrote back and said, yeah, everybody knows that. We began a conversation which led to, and this is the way of all true collaborations, literally, I say it was his idea, he says it was my idea, but we tried to record books with a full cast, which nobody had ever done before. And for a long time, we had trouble convincing people what we're doing. They tell us it's like radio theater. And it wasn't, because radio theater is abridged and adapted.
Surprisingly nutritious.
Aliens ate my homework. I have aliens in my
There's intelligence.
Jeremy, you're interrupting. Turn the sound up. Sorry about that, Bruce.
Thank you.
So anyway,
I think you must be trying to look up your audiobook.
I didn't know that was on my end. Sorry. Go ahead.
So anyway, we had this conversation. We decided to try recording the full cast, which nobody had ever done before, an unabridged book. Not an adaptation, not a radio play. The actual book, just done with many actors instead of one. And we had that company for 5 years, and we ended up recording literally our magnum opus. We recorded The Golden Compass with Philip Pullman narrating and a full cast of actors drawn for the London stage.
Wow.
And a lot of people for a long time thought that was literally one of the best audiobooks ever made. But about that time, he sold his company to Random House. This was like a side venture for the Listening Library. And as soon as he told me he was selling, I thought, well, that's it, because they're going to look at how much it cost us to make an audiobook. They say, why would we spend that much money? Because it costs way more to do this. And so I thought, well, this is over. But then they called me and asked me to produce 3 audiobooks for them in the rest of Pat Reed's Dealing with Dragons series. And Tim was a little kind of shamefaced that he's hiring me to do something we used to do as partners. And I thought, well, if you want to pay me a bunch of seed money to start my own company, sure, let's do it.
Yeah.
About 2 years later, I called him, because we're still very good friends. And I called to say, so I'm starting my own company. He said, damn it, I knew if I hired you to do those books, you were going to start your own company. And we've been doing it for 20 years now.
That's so cool. That's great. I love that, man. That's the American dream, right? You just take that and take off.
It wasn't my dream to lose as much money as I did in the first few years, but
yeah. Well,
but, I get to work with great people. We do Tamara Pierce's books. We've done Ken Apple's Airborne series, which is some very early cyberpunk, not cyberpunk, steampunk. Yeah, it's not just doing my books. We do books from all kinds of authors.
yeah, I noticed the Tamara Pierce audiobooks when Jeremy had it up on the screen a little bit ago. That's really cool. It's great. It's like, that's the wonderful thing about having a company like this, is that you can interact with other authors in such a dynamic and fun and interesting way. And that's the thing that I love. I love these books. This is how we kind of ended up bringing you on the show.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was where we started talking about having you on the show, and it's like, but these anthologies of like, just, you got the coolest authors. Like, how did you end up collecting some of these people? Like, did you seek them out specifically, or like, how did these come about, kind of?
Well, how it came about originally, and this goes back to, it's interesting you were talking about My Teacher Flunked the Planet. I had done My Teacher Flunked the Planet for a packaging company. And in case you're not sure what a packager is, basically, they're like the guy who comes up to you at a party and says, I have a good idea for a book. Why don't you write it? We'll split the money. But packagers actually do that. They come up with a concept, sell it to a publisher, and provide a full package. They provide cover, usually the cover, interior art, with all the editing services. So it is a package that comes to the publisher. The first packager, and probably the all-time champion, was Edward Stratemeyer, who created Nancy Drew, the Hardy Boys, Tom Swift, the Rover Boys. All those series came out of the Stratemeyer syndicate. So I was working for this packager, and I won't get into the long details behind doing My Teacher series, but they were incredibly successful. And they wanted me to do more, but I really felt the last book, My Teacher Flunked the Planet, said everything I wanted to say about those characters. It stopped there. One of the things that I don't want to do is carry out a series that goes diminishingly downhill. And there are a number of examples of that in science fiction. Tamara Pierce is one of my closest friends, and we consult with each other on our books. And we have this vow we've made to each other, which is that friends don't let friends write the Dolphins of Pern.
That's harsh, but true. Oh my gosh.
So
That's
I
cool.
was publishing independently, and I didn't want to keep working for the packager because they keep a chunk of the money. So they came desperate to have me doing something. They came up with this idea of doing these anthologies. And because I had a lot of connections in the field and had been around for a fair amount of time at that point, and I loved the short story format, and there wasn't a lot of room, a lot of places for people to publish short stories for kids. Oh, I can't believe you put that up there, Jeremy.
I just had to see it. I had to see it. I had to see it for myself. I just
had to verify it was real.
It went from Dragons of Pern to Dolphins of Pern. Wow.
Yeah.
That's the John C. Lilly edition.
Long, slow decline, yeah. So
Anyway.
I was active in the Science Fiction Writers of America, and I knew a lot of people. I'd lived in New York for a while. I was at all the gatherings, so I knew a lot of people. And there were a handful of people I thought had the right sensibility to, the adult writers, I thought had the right sensibility to write for kids.
Yeah.
So I started contacting them and asked them if they would like to try their hand at a story. And then several of them replied. Here's something that was startling to me after I figured it out. I came up in children's books where the editing is pretty rigorous. And a lot of these adult writers who brought in said to me, I have never been edited like this. And most of them were happy about it because there wasn't that much going on, or that much really rigorous work, developmental editing in what they were doing, especially for magazines, I think. You either sold a story or didn't. There'd probably be some minor stuff. And this was driven home to me about 10 years after I did that series. I did a long short story for one of the major editors in the field, a very prestigious anthologizer. And I thought, wow, that's going to be great to work with this guy. And he'll help me improve this story. And it'll be great to go through this process. And he took it exactly as I wrote it. And we didn't do any work at all. But that's what people seem to be used to, because the adult writers that we brought in were almost to a man and woman startled with the amount of editing that we did on the short stories for those collections, and but also really enjoyed the process. They said, I love this, we're really making the story better. And I worked with an editor in-house that's at Byron Press's place, the packager, and we also had an editor in-house at Scholastic. So it was really, we had to be careful not to hit the authors with too much. I would sort of compile all our notes. We might go back and forth a couple of times. So the stories were very carefully and lovingly edited. And and the trick is partly to get a balance. You have to have some that are funny, scary, some that are scary, funny, some that are going to flat out terrify you, some that are shorter and some that are longer. And you try to start with your strongest story and end with your second strongest story, and then sort of mix them up in between. So there's a variety in length and in tone. And sometimes you'd have one you could use. And we didn't edit when I brought in stories like from Ray Bradbury, stories that had already been published. That was just to expose kids to some classic science fiction.
Yeah. Yeah, I that was like some of the things that we were noticing when I was going through this collection is just like all the names that are in this collection, you know. It's like you've got Ray Bradbury, like you said. Right? Yeah, Joe Lansdale. It's like, man, you know, it's really awesome. It's so cool to see. You really, you know, like for me, and I was, before the show, I was reading your There's Nothing Under the Bed story that starts off this collection, so it's naturally the strongest story in your collection. And I was giving it a read, and I was like, man, that story, like, I remember it from when I was a kid so well, and it's stuck. It's just one of those things that sticks with you, and that's so true of so many of the other stories in the collection. So I guess, like, my most important question for you is, what do you feel makes good horror? Like, just riff on horror for us for a minute.
What I think makes really good horror is not buckets of blood. That's easy. Mm-hmm. What makes really good horror is you're walking down a hall. And at the end of the hall, there's a door. And there's probably, but not certainly, something horrible behind that door. And you really have to open it for various reasons, and you approach that door. It's that dread, that building dread, that I think is more interesting than just, you know, you can do splatterpunk. And that's more visceral. But I like a more cerebral kind of horror that scares you because of the dread it creates. Yeah. There's Nothing Under the Bed, I think, is the scariest story I've ever written. And the editor, who remains a friend of mine, has told me she still has nightmares about it on occasion.
Wow.
I mean, the thing took his cat. I mean, that's.
I know. Right. Well, it's that Harold's fault.
Harold was bad.
Screw it.
I think two things. One, we just recorded that story with a full cast. It's in my collection, odder than ever, and we did. I wanted to get all this. We had about half of them recorded as single story releases. So, yeah, and the guy I got that plays the sort of Lord of the Underworld, Westix, has this amazing voice.
Cool.
Like 3 octaves deeper than mine, and we were at rehearsal, and the kid who was reading the main part, when Trevor was playing Westix, started to speak. The kid across the table went, "Whoa, oh my God," because his voice is so powerful.
That's awesome. That's so funny. How cool.
Although I would like to think my story is always the best in each one, it was my contractually, I had to write the lead story for each of those books.
I see. It was. Oh, interesting. Well, I guess it is Bruce Coville's book of blank. Exactly. So.
It's usually the longest story too. We occasionally run a really long story, but they were selling on my name partly, and so I had to deliver for those. And I enjoyed doing that. My goal was always to try to put a spin, an unexpected spin. If you do Bruce Coville's Book of Monsters or Bruce Coville's Book of Ghosts, you're going to get a bunch of stories that are all themed around ghosts or whatever. So the thing for me was always to think, what can I do that will be different, unexpected, but still true to the theme, or put a spin on things. So, for example, There's Nothing Under the Bed. Kids are always afraid of what's under the bed. In this story, what's terrifying is the fact that there is literally nothing under the bed. It's this blank space that you go through. So it takes a basic trope, scary thing under the bed, and turns it inside out.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. That's so true. But go on.
Well, I wanted to pause on this. You were talking about cerebral horror, because I was thinking of this idea that to truly be horrified and terror is not necessarily like something that you anticipate. So you use the example of, well, I mean, I guess in a sense you do, but it's visceral in a different way. Like it's more about the feelings that it evokes. So like if I'm writing something and it's like capturing terror, the reason why it wouldn't necessarily be as visceral if it was strictly violent is because there's this feeling of dread that you feel. So it'd be, to use another analogy, like I had heard that people like before there were lights and stuff, like the demons come out of that dark space. There's nothing there. Or maybe there is because of like predators and all of these things. And I just find that fascinating, the idea of terror as being cerebral, because we all have felt that. It's not necessarily about strictly viscerality, it's the way that it makes you feel.
Yeah.
Is that a fair characterization?
No, I think that's very fair. It's interesting to talk about Out of the Darkness. I'm listening to on audio right now A Distant Mirror, which is a very long book about the plague in the 14th century. But one of the things she goes on about is that there was, once it was dark, it was dark. Yeah, in the castle you might have torches, but for most people at that time, once darkness fell, that was it. You might have a campfire.
Yeah.
If you're a peasant, you probably didn't even have candles. So it was a world of darkness, and there was always things that needed to be explained going on out there.
That's interesting.
But yeah, darkness is, it's hard for us to really put ourselves back there and really think, oh, wow, what is it like? You know, I've got like 4 lights on in this room, so you guys can see. What is it like to have no access to light for such a large part of your 24-hour span?
You know,
Yeah.
You said that you had said all you wanted to with the My Teacher is an Alien series, Brock, Solomon, Creeblum, and Peter and Duncan, you know. But it always occurred to me that what they went through and what Rod Albright and the Space Patrolman went through, you know, what if those two like groups joined together for some, you know, reality shattering threat? I don't know.
He's always like this, sir.
One thing that would be tricky about that is simply a legal matter. I don't hold the rights to My Teacher's Alien books because I did them for a packager.
Oh man.
Yeah. Oh man, is right. They're the most successful books I ever had, and I don't get full royalties on them because.
No.
And I'll tell you something even worse. The film rights were bought by a low-level company that did a kind of a skeevy turn in the contract, and they've been locked up in perpetuity for about close to 30 years now.
What? We could have had a friggin' movie. Excuse me. I'm so mad.
3 or 4 times a year. Slowed down a little bit now, but 3 or 4 times a year, I would get a call or an email saying, I loved this book when I was 12. I'm 35 now. I got a good job at a film company. We're looking for properties, and I've always wanted to make this movie. Are the rights available? And I'd say they're locked up. And they'd say, well, who has them? Maybe we can work together. I'd name the production company, and they'd say, oh, I'm so sorry. And that would be
Oh, man. What's the point of them holding on to it if they're not going to do anything with them?
I literally wrote to them 3 months ago and said, it's been almost 30 years. You haven't made a movie. Can you just release these to me?
Yeah.
We still have plans to make it. And I thought, you do not, you bastards.
Lioness.
Now, I have heard that with someone, if they don't do anything with the rights for a certain amount of time, that it lapses.
That's got to be in the contract.
Yeah.
That's what happened with that really shoddy, poor attempt at a Wheel of Time pilot. They just did it so they could retain the rights for a few more years. So I don't know if that applies to your situation or not.
It does not.
That's really sad.
Believe me, this has been looked at by numerous lawyers.
Yeah.
I'm sure he's like, I'm getting PTSD just talking about it.
You have the rights to the Aliens Ate My Homework series, all right?
I do, and they've been 2 of those have been filmed now.
Yeah, but there are characters missing. I believe Snout and the Tar Gibbons are not in that, correct?
Tar Gibbons is in, Snout is out.
Really? I don't remember Tar Gibbons being... Okay, it's been so long.
Okay.
But
Tar
Snout
Gibbons-
is the most important character later on.
Snout was a victim of budget. These are not high-budget films. And the makeup and the monster effects, the latex effects, are top notch. They're done by one of the best in the business, but he doesn't come cheap. And he worked with the guys who made the films, who I adore. They worked really hard on them to do what they could with the budget. What you see on the screen, you see about $3 worth of film for every dollar they actually had to spend. They really went, because of doing all kinds of stuff, did far more than you would think with the budget they had. But it was a very limited budget, and there just was not room for all those aliens in the budget. Somebody had to go, and it was Snout, alas. And they promised me they'd bring him back in the second film, and then it didn't happen.
Oh, sad.
I think I would have sacrificed Phil before I would have sacrificed Snout, because I mean Snout is a crucial character later on, and clearly he's awesome because he gives Rod a book that is like almost no words in the entire book except remain calm, and then Rod throws it against the room because it's like that's all it says is remain calm. You know, I loved that. You know,
Awesome.
the way that you world build. And something else that I really loved about that series, I believe it was in How I Lost My Sneakers in Dimension X, there was a reality quake where everybody's appearances got mixed up or something. That was awesome. How often did that happen in those environments?
Well, that was specifically about Dimension X. I don't think we had any more reality quakes. But things got very weird in the other books, too. Unfortunately, the publisher really blew the release of the fourth book. It was a good thing because it's been taking me a while between books. And I wrote a semi-conclusion in the fourth book. But I actually planned to have 7 books in the series. And the idea was that Rod would apprentice himself. You see him do it. He apprentices himself to Tar Gibbons, and then to Snout. And then he would apprentice himself to each of the aliens. That would be 5 books. First book, he gets to know them. Then he apprentices himself to each of them and learns their specific skill. And at the end of the series, the 7th book, he's fully qualified to take it because he has learned all their skills to take on a ship of his own. But I didn't get to write those last 3 books, unfortunately.
Oh, that's sad.
Publishing is a painful business sometimes.
Yeah, it really is. Well, can I also ask, while we're talking about painful things, like, what is I'll tell you, just, I'm working on an audiobook right now. I've got a proof and I've got a great narrator, but I can hardly stand to listen to the thing. I cannot detach. It's like, how do you detach to a point where you can like enjoy the process of working on an audiobook and enjoy the process of like seeing the characters come to life in these movies? Because it's like, I want to enjoy that, but I get so just like, freaked out.
Well, I'm going to go backwards from film to audiobook.
Totally.
You really have to let go. You have, unless you're J.K. Rowling, you really have very, very little control of what's going to happen on film.
Yeah.
The guys who did the Aliens films, Roger and Eric, were very. I loved working with them because they were very receptive. They kept me in the loop. We had various stumbles along the way. I was able to help them out sometimes, but it was going to be what they do for the film. You have to let go. You know, I think the best thing any author ever said about that was somebody said to him, "Oh my gosh, what they did to your poor book in that film," and he just pointed at the shelf and said, "My book is just fine."
Yeah.
My book is fine. Now, in audiobooks, I will tell you that I personally, if I narrate I've never narrated a full-length audiobook. We're solo. I have narrated as. Because our full cast process is so different. If I do a narration of a short story, I have a very hard time stepping back from it. Authors are very invested, as they should be. We often bring in the author to narrate if we can. And I have never had an author who at some point in the process did not look at me with grief in his or her eyes and say, "Who wrote this shit?"
That's so sad.
Then they asked me to change it. And I said, "No, this is an audiobook. You wrote it, you read it. And you wrote it on the page."
That's so hilarious.
I mean, I know how that feels, like looking back at something you wrote and it's like, this is shit. How did it ever get published?
Yeah, it says. I'm usually pretty happy with my books by the time they're published. Now, having said that, I also think I might have a modern record for rewriting books after they were published and went out through. I've done this for about 12 books because I never stopped wanting to edit.
Interesting. That's really interesting. Like, what
Oh, it's a
is
personality disorder. It's
it just sits wrong with you, huh? And you just can't leave it. That's interesting. Wow. I hope that never happens to me, but I'm sure it will now that I've known that it happens.
Ben or Gregor, do either of you have a question? I don't want to exclude you.
I wish I could have reread some of your work before this. Unfortunately, it's been years since I've read it. I do vividly remember a lot of things from the My Teacher is an Alien series. I think the thing that sticks out the most to me was the scene, and I'm pretty sure it was My Teacher Flunked the Planet, where the one kid wakes up to find his brain is outside of his head in a jar thing.
That's actually in My Teacher Glows in the Dark, which is My Teacher Glows in the Dark and My Teacher Flunked the Planet.
Oh yeah, that was My Teacher Glows in the Dark.
But they're basically one story that I had to split in half because it got so long.
Oh, interesting.
I was about halfway through writing it and I realized there was way more to tell.
Yeah.
And then the question was, okay, Susan told the first book, Duncan told the second book, Peter told the third book, who tells the fourth book? And I thought, I'll have Broxham tell the fourth book, the alien, give him a chance. Totally didn't work because as soon as he started telling the story, it became an adult book, not a kid's book. His voice was just an adult voice. So then I thought, I'll have them do it in alternating chapters. It's all three of their story. And the timing on that just didn't make any sense because it really was still Peter's story. So Peter tells the third and the fourth books because it's really one big story that is split in half because it was too much.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. So it's interesting that Ben kind of mixed it up. Maybe he sensed the rhythm between the two.
Yeah. Oh, that cover of My Teacher Fried My Brains is nowhere near as good as the
I
first
know.
those covers are the bomb.
Right there.
I love those covers.
That is so much better. It's so much more attention to detail. Why did they dumb it down? I'm sorry to ask. Yeah.
I'm sure you don't have a say in it.
No, not much. Really don't. But putting a new cover on a book that's been on for a long, long time is a way of signaling to booksellers that this book is still vital, still has a life. You should keep stocking it. Yeah. So it's as much a message to booksellers as it is to readers. There's a little inside poker there. And the other thing is that stylistically, that cover you're showing right now was stylistically great for the era. But the look of books changes, and the book reader, the kid, the child reader, is sort of keyed into different kinds of stylistic elements or approaches. Mm-hmm. So, for example, the framer on this, that frame, the blue frame and then the red frame, that's very old school. A full bleed where the picture goes right off the edges is more likely now. So I thought the comic look of the next ones, I said, have you read the fourth book? That one has funny stuff in it, but it's really, really dark. I'm not sure this is appropriate. I remember the original editor was gone. I don't know if anybody looked at the books before they put the new covers on.
That's hilarious. Yeah, I know. It's it doesn't fit at all.
Yeah, I don't know why, but the My Teacher Glows in the Dark one, that one just always freaked me out when I looked at it as a kid, especially the fact that the guy had purple skin but still had the mustache.
Oh, yeah. The books got to the point where they were title driven to some extent. My Teacher's an Alien, and I can say this because I didn't come up with the title. Again, the packager asked me to write this. There's a long story behind that, but it's and it almost went across the table. We were at lunch because it was the best title I'd ever heard, and I hadn't thought of it myself. So then My Teacher Fried My Brains. It's sort of natural, although I wanted to call the third one My Teacher Zapped My Butt.
My teacher's after my butt?
My teacher zapped my butt. Now,
A+.
I tried that in schools, and kids would fall off the chairs laughing. But the editor, Simon Schuster, said, well, that's not very tasteful. And I was like, oh, come on.
What? Kids aren't tasteful.
What are you talking to me about tasteful for?
Yeah, kids don't want tasteful.
Well, I was in the vanguard. I fought. I used to do a speech called "The Importance of Bad Taste in Children's Literature," and
I love that.
I fought to freedom. Now you'll find books that serve farts a lot and things like that. But I was leading the vanguard to write stories where farts were okay. My God.
I know, it's like that's the thing. Kids' literature is for kids, and kids think certain things are funny.
And as Jane Austen almost said, it is a truth universally acknowledged that there's nothing funnier than a fart.
Yeah, that's like half the quote, I think, maybe even 70% of it.
My teachers in the Alien series, as you know, it was in very serious and very dark places. But the kids followed me there because I told them at the beginning, hey, we're going to have fun. And I've always felt if you start out with a fart joke on page 1, or some other laugh on page 1, if you start out saying, somehow signaling, this is going to be a beautiful story about deep and rich feelings told in wondrous prose, kids can say, I got a video game that I'm much more interested in. Fart joke on page 1, and follow through and give them some laughs. They will follow you anywhere to places they wouldn't have gone if you said this book is about this or that serious topic.
Yeah, it's so true.
Humor's the key to bringing them along.
Yeah. And the other interesting technique that you use a lot, and that you use not just in There's Nothing Under the Bed, but also in the introduction to the book, is you directly are addressing the reader and directly addressing the children audience, and in a way that it just becomes very conversational, and it's like, hey, I get you. You like spooky stuff. I like spooky stuff. Let's explore this spooky world together. And it's the same thing with, I started, my teacher series earlier too, just to, freshen up on that a little bit. And you have just this really great, tight, third person perspective that functions like first person in a really elegant way. That's so it's you really just, you connect with the reader in this really empathetic way, and you really understand and remember, I think, what it's like to be a kid, and a way even a lot of children's authors seem to struggle with. So I applaud that. I really do.
Thank you. I taught elementary school for 7 years. And that's part of the key to any success that I've had. Is that was like doing a graduate class in writing for kids. Was teaching for 7 years. Peter, Susan, and Duncan. Well, I had a kid like Peter every year. There was always at least one, the sci-fi nerd who didn't quite fit in, but was really, really smart. I had 2 or 3 Susans every year. Susan is to a degree a type, and I had these just smart, balanced, have their act together girls that are just like what you hope kids can turn out to be. Duncan is based on one very specific kid.
Oh dear.
I had him, I think, 4 years in a row, because I came to the school as a student teacher, and I had him. I was teaching first grade, and I worked with him. They hired me in the middle of the year because I graduated all schedules with most things in my life, to teach second grade. And when he got to second grade, 2 or 3 years later, I had him again. Next year into third year, they came back to me for a special reading program I was teaching.
Oh, nice.
Next year, I moved to 4th grade, and he got there too. So well. Now, he was not a bad kid, but he got in trouble all the time. It's probably because they smacked around at home. And, you get smacked around at home, you smack around kids around you at school. But he got in trouble in interesting ways. This is a true story, typical Stephen story. Indoor recess, because I live in Syracuse. It's cold and snowy out, from about mid-October to mid-May. So indoor recess, too bad to go outside. I got 2 classes, my class, my teaching partner's class, running around having a good time. 5 kids come trotting over to me. They go, Mr. Cole, Stephen flushed a banana down the toilet. It's all plugged up.
Oh my God, what the hell?
I said, Stephen, get over here. He was used to hearing this because I said it 3 or 4 times. I say, Stephen, get over here.
In your sleep.
He stood in front of me. His kid saw like a fire plug, and it faced like a full moon with a crew cut on top. Big glasses. Looked up and he said, and this is a direct quote, "Yo." I said, Stephen, did you Steve, did you flush a banana down the toilet? You know what he said? Yeah.
Well, yeah.
And I said,
Yeah.
what for? And he said, I don't know. I wanted to see what would happen.
Yeah, exactly.
How can you not use a kid like that in a book? I used him in 5. He's the model for Eddie the Monsters Ring, and he's Duncan in all 4 books of My Teacher's Name.
That's awesome.
Now, having said that, let me tell you this. When My Teacher's Name was supposed to be a standalone book, but when it took off the way it did, and it sold probably more books in its first year than my previous 20 books it sold in 12 years before that, the packagers after me and the publishers after me to do more. And I was speaking at the New York State Reading Association in they used to meet in the Catskills, one of those big old Catskills inns like you see in Dirty Dancing. And Jonathan Kozel was speaking, and he's a passionate firebrand advocate for kids and for kids in underserved areas. And I had to drive him there to New York for the conference. I thought, well, the only reason to do more of these books is to talk about this kind of stuff. The reason to do Aliens is it lets you look at this at our culture from the outside and say, what the hell is wrong with you people? And to keep things interesting myself, and when I went in, I said, I want to do 2 more books, one from Duncan's point of view, one from Peter's point of view. And to write from Duncan's point of view, I had to get inside his skin, imaginatively project myself, and try to understand why he acted the way he did. And I wish now I had done it when I was still a teacher, because I would have been a better teacher for him if I had done that. And I think every teacher's probably try to write a story from the point of view of the kid who's the biggest thorn on their side, because you got to try to figure them out. And Duncan's book was fun to write because he's funny. He's like a fart in church. He just walks in the room and it's funny. was a hoot to write. It was a gas to write, so to speak.
That's cool.
Peter's books were much more difficult because Peter was not funny. For Peter to have the humor, it had to be from the wildest one because Peter was a very serious child. So the fun and the humor had to come from the crazy aliens around him, like Fleef and Girk. And then it goes into that, of course, that more serious thing. But Hulan was kind of funny, the trickster, and Big Julie is very weird. So that's part of how that grew. But yeah, Duncan's a very real kid.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Here's a coded to the story. I always wondered what happened to him. I thought it was probably an unhappy story because it was a very dysfunctional family. I knew his brother had spent time on the Slammer. And about 10 years ago, he contacted me out of the blue on Facebook. He left home at 16. He said it was the best thing I ever did for myself. He is married, worked as a school custodian, retired. My students are retired. I'm so old, my students are retiring. And now I get a Christmas card from them every year.
Oh, that's so cool, dude. That's awesome. It's so nice to touch lives like that. I bet that you were a great influence for this young, or I guess, well, this man. I almost said young man, but given what you just said, but that's cool. You know, it's like it's funny. It's a funny anecdote to have had this kid for 4 years, but you can't have the same student for 4 years without like affecting them, I think, in probably a good way. So that's cool.
No,
That's really
I
nice.
love teaching.
That's cool.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I just said hello to Phoenix. See him for the first time.
Yeah, no, so definitely something to be said about the aesthetics of just having a camera. I was gonna, it's part of the show. So, but I did have a question before. So I'll admit this is actually very exciting because you deal with a lot of things that I find very, I think very interesting and humorous, and I think that we definitely need more of that in the world. And so my thought was actually about writing itself when Regina was talking about just if any advice with like audiobooks, and kind of my thought is similar, like with writing itself. Do you have any thoughts for aspiring writers? Because as you may know, and as you described, it's kind of a brutal thing.
Yeah.
But like you've been successful though. Like that's amazing.
Well,
like you have works that people are excited about.
So to begin with, the secret is, I've said more than once, the secret of my success is a boneheaded obstinance. I'm just too dumb to give up.
Got to.
It was, you had to be somewhat obsessed. And frankly, I probably would have been a better parent if I'd been less obsessed with becoming a writer. I devoted a lot of energy, mental energy, time to that pursuit. I was a father very young. My first child was born when I was 20. I was 19 years old. Turned 20 a week later. So I poured a lot of energy in that direction. But you have to be really obsessed to do that, because you're going to get a lot of rejection. And I went to school with people who wrote as well as I do, if not better, but will never be published because they gave up. And some of them didn't even send their stuff out because they were afraid they were going to get a rejection. You know, what's the total downside? You get a little piece of paper that says, sorry, we don't want it. You know, to the best of my knowledge, nobody's ever written a story so bad that the editor drove to their house, rang their doorbell. When they opened the door, they smacked them in the face and said, don't do that again.
A lot of writers have sensitive souls, so the rejection letter
Might as well.
So the first thing is you don't give up. You have to believe in yourself and keep trying. So if I'm talking to younger people, they need this. Like, first thing I say is read, because you got to fill your brain up. But you guys, I'm sure, all do that. The second is write, and write journals, write letters, keep track of things. So that's the second thing, is keep a journal. Because a journal is like a gift from the self you are to the self you're going to be. And I write stuff in my journal. I think, well, I don't know, I'm writing this down. I'll never forget it. It was so cool, or so funny, or so horrible. And 5 years later, I go back and look at the journal. I think, wow, I forgot all about that. But a single sentence in the journal can be like a fish hook you drop in your subconscious mind that pulls back the experience and sights and the sounds and the feelings that they're all there. So it's a way of saving this for yourself. And then you go back to what I was saying sort of at the beginning. As Winston Churchill said to the people of Britain during World War II, never give up. Never give up. Never give up.
It's the truth.
Take classes.
Oh, yeah.
There's lots of great books on writing. Take classes, find mentors, find a group to work with. Now, the other thing is, and almost all writers will admit this, a successful career almost always has an element of luck. There are really good writers who haven't had the kind of breaks that I had, but breaks happen partly because of you making it happen. There's actually a science of luck. And first part of the luck is working really hard. Alan J. Lerner, who wrote My Fair Lady, Camelot, Paint Your Wagon, Gigi, when he won the Oscar for An American in Paris, his father, who was living in Florida at the time, was talking to a neighbor, and the neighbor said, Alan certainly is a lucky boy. And Alan Lerner's father said, yes, he is. And the funny thing is, the harder he works, the luckier he gets. And
yeah.
So, but here's part two of luck. If luck is being in the right place at the right time, the more places you are, the more times you are in places, then the better chance you have of having luck. So you put yourself out there. You go to conferences, you meet people, you make connections. And this is the third thing. I remember reading this in the Venerable Parade magazine when I was about my mid-teens. But it's a theory called luck lines. And luck lines consist of positive connections with other human beings. So you make a positive connection, and that's a luck line. But if you make a lot of positive connections, you start to build a luck web that overlaps, becomes more dense, and has more possibilities. Now, you don't really do this with the thought, I'm doing this because maybe I can use this person. That's exactly the wrong way to do it. It's simply having a positive view on life and making positive connections with people and building this web of connections that can pay off. Remember, when you start working, when you start sending stuff in, when you start working, maybe working with somebody who's very young and new, secretaries sometimes get promoted in publishing companies. They remember who treated them like a secretary and who treated them like a valuable human being. They keep that with them, trust me. So you approach everybody of every status with equal respect and compassion.
That's such good advice.
I really like, yeah, I mean, I appreciate that because I think even though I tend to put myself out there a lot, sometimes I feel like I forget the component that like it's also there's an upshot to it. I think I'm used to thinking I'm only doing this, and granted, not that this is always good, but used to doing things because I think that I'm going to fail. And it's interesting to think that the upshot would be, as you described, the luck lines, which would come from positive relationships with people, and that's huge. And understanding and making connections with people, as well as just having something to say. And I would imagine, with your writing, like you probably feel like you want to convey something artistic, and you're trying to actually, from listening to you, connecting with even kids, and that you have connected with different groups of people, and how that inspires your writing. So yeah, that's great. I appreciate it a lot.
Thank you. Partly I write from kids because that's sort of where I am emotionally.
Yeah. Well, you taught for 7 years.
You have to have a feel for that. I mean, when I was young, I liked babysitting. I always had a connection to kids. When I was a teenager, I loved babysitting. Partly because they're so funny and so malleable and so open to stuff, and you can just goof with them. So it's, that's a natural spot for me. Why do you write for kids? It's what feels natural and right to me. Doesn't mean everybody should write for kids. You should write at the level that feels natural and right for you. Sometimes it takes time to find that. But I knew from the time I was 17 or 18, I knew I wanted to write. And then my first goal was to write Marvel Comics.
That's cool.
My first published words were in Marvel leather columns when I was a kid.
Oh, fun.
And the highlight of this was the best thing. The highlight of my college career was bringing Stan Lee as a speaker to my college.
Wow.
Oh, wow. Way to go.
That's really awesome.
It happened because as a freshman, I wrote this long exegesis on Silver Surfer #3. It was like 2 singles pages. And somebody at the published, I doubt Stan had read it at that point, but this is really something. I got a letter from his PR agent said, Stan loves speaking in colleges. Do you want to bring him in? And so I figured out how to get this fun and went around it. I learned a lot doing this. And that was it. That was my freshman year. It was literally the high point of my college career. Everything was nothing's good. In the next 3.5 years, nothing else is good as being a standard.
Yeah, man. Jeez, yeah. How do you top that? That's awesome. Boy. Yeah, man. It's like, so now we've had Bruce Coville, who's had Stan Lee on the show, and now in 40 to 60 years, somebody's going to have one of us on. Yeah. So that's cool. But
when I was a freshman in college, I was a freshman year 68, 69. And it's honestly hard for anybody 2 or 3 generations away from that to realize what a crucible that year was. Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. Martin Luther King was assassinated. You had the riots at the Chicago Convention. Nixon was elected president. The Vietnam War was in full bloom. It was an amazing, and in many ways horrifying year. We haven't anything like it until last year.
yeah.
So I was very political, and I was reading a book by Maria Montessori, who created Montessori schooling techniques. And she's a very humanistic approach to kids, and talked on and on about the importance of kids, how they are shaping them. And I thought, okay, the most political thing I can do, the most radical thing I can do, is work for kids. Adults, it's too late. They're screwed. But kids, you can still help enlighten them, help them see things, help them develop a filter so they can see when they're being shucked by the system, by the man. So to me, the most effective thing I could do, I thought long run, was write for kids. There was an old phrase, we don't hear much anymore, like other old phrases passed into oblivion, that said the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. And what that means, and it's true, is that by what shapes the child shapes the man, and it's the man that shapes the world, or now in a more enlightened time, what shapes the child shapes the adult. It's the adults that move and affect the world. So what you do with kids is more likely to have longer lasting impact than what you do with a political life where you're actually in politics. So to me, it was a path to effectiveness.
So what age range do you write these books for? I mean, it looks like some of them might be middle grade, but some of them might be younger than that.
Yeah, I've actually written for all age levels. I did one adult book to prove I could. It was for that package they asked me to. And I thought, oh, sure. And it was a lot of fun. And I never went back and did it again because I knew I could do it.
Yeah.
But 8 to 12 is where things naturally fall for me. You mentioned earlier Moongobble and Space Brat. Those are more for the 2nd, 3rd grade level. And I love writing for them because you can just be so goofy and it's so much fun. And I've written picture books. It started partly because my first book, my wife is an artist, or she's a writer now too. And by the way, to give you guys hope, she sold her first book at the age of 60.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Nice.
I mean, Raymond Chandler was something like that as well, right? I mean,
Really?
I don't think he sold his first book until he was like 55, 60, something like that.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, people think, I mean, I was frantic. I was so desperate to become a writer. I thought if I'm not published by the time I'm 30, I'll probably fling myself off a bridge, which is really stupid, but that's sort of where I was. So I did, but anyway, she's a fabulous artist. And we started out trying to work together with her. She illustrated all the Space Brat books. Not the cover, the first one, the cover of Planet of the Dips is her artwork.
Right.
That's cool.
That's her artwork.
Huh, cool.
Right. It reminds me
Nice.
of Garbage Pail Kids, kind of.
Yeah. Exactly.
And, the monster on the cover of Space Brat 2, which is down below there.
Right.
Yeah, that thing, that's a fuzzy grumper. We used to make, when I was still in college and we were trying to find out how to put body and soul together, just how to put food on the table, we used to make stuffed toys. And I would come up with, she just started making some, and then I would come up with concepts and we'd make them. That's a fuzzy grumper. And we used to make stuffed fuzzy grumpers and sell them at craft shows.
That's
What
cool.
was the dog called? A Poodnoobie? A
The
saber
Pood Newbie.
Yeah,
Lunk the Pood Newbie.
right there. Man.
Aren't you impressed by how well Jeremy is acquainted with the oeuvre of your
I am
works?
very impressed.
It's like beautiful.
I'm curious if you ever had a friendly or unfriendly rivalry going with R.L. Stine, who was already neck and neck with you in the 90s as far as it's like even every time they rolled out those
You guys like fist fight.
Yeah, those scholastic book papers that they would hand out where you could order them, and like everyone, all my friends and I always ordered a Goosebumps and something from you and maybe Scary Story to Tell in the Dark. But did you ever have any kind of, competition feeling with R.L. Stine?
Okay, let's talk about Bob.
Let's dish.
First, he's a really nice guy. Second, we were trying to do different stuff.
Yeah.
Goosebumps work at one level. And you can say that in two ways. We just sort of work at one level. I don't want to dish too hard on him, but okay, a friend of mine made this very astute observation once. He said, take a Goosebumps book, turn to the second page, maybe it's third, I can't remember, but he said, turn to the second page. Put your finger about a third of the way down the page. Now see if you're pointing to a description of the character's hair. And try it.
Oh my god! Oh, wow!
Jeremy has those.
Mind blowing.
Look at Jeremy.
That's
hilarious.
hilarious.
The other thing was he was selling way more than I was, and he actually the Goosebumps books were selling so much they broke a rule of publishing, which is basically that a rising tide lifts all boats. That a success is good for everybody, but he was selling so much. Barnes and Noble, because their Barnes and Noble didn't think really straight, had a limited budget for kids' books, and they were giving more and more of it to Stine's books. And so that squeezed out other books. So, no, I never had a personal problem with Bob. I like him. I used to think of myself as the post-Stine writer. When kids wanted a little bit more than you get from Goosebumps book, they'd come to what I was doing. And there was a moment that made me very happy. That I discovered Bob's son is named Matt. And I discovered that Matt Stine's favorite writer was...
Oh, nice. Swish.
Nice.
I got his kid, by God.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. That's great.
Hey,
Very
I wonder if it
well
was like a
done.
rebellious thing. Screw you,
Yeah.
Dad. I'm gonna go Bruce Coville.
Just like
It's a
Stephen King,
Stein house.
just like Stephen King's kids never really dug his work. They would rather read Redwall or something along those lines.
That's so funny.
Yeah, and of course, Big Steve was writing for older kids anyway, so it's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the adult title you wrote?
Oh, it was a series called Philip Jose Farmer's Dungeon. And I wrote the second book in the series, third book in the series, I think. It was a package series, and
And it wasn't under your name?
Well, actually, they got in trouble with a series they did, something like Isaac Asimov's Robot City, or one of these ones.
Right.
And they weren't putting the author's name on the front. I think the dungeon covers, there's nobody's name on the cover. It's a very unusual cover. That's it. So yeah, it was here's the anecdote about being the second one. So yes, on the back it's Philip Jose Farmer. That's the selling name, but then I think my name's on the back of that. So there was like a 400-page book, something like that. And Charles DeLint wrote the third book, and he got carried away, and he wrote the third book before I'd written the second book. But he left out one of the major characters. So I was the only person who wrote in the series that got to kill off a major character because I had to explain why she wasn't there in the next book.
Awesome. Good solution.
But
That's interesting.
The series was, as they got toward the end, the packager, I think, lost interest. I don't know if interested Phil Farmer was. The sixth book is an unholy mess. It's the only book that bad that I finished reading. I just wanted to finish reading it because I had the investment in it. It was all I could do to keep it fleeing across the room numerous times. It is just, the books are like 100,000 words each. So people who slog through 500,000 words to get to the sixth book got slapped in the face by this sixth book. It's a matter of,
That's so.
well, it still causes me to simmer with rage, but I cherish my grudges.
Yeah. No, I hate it when that happens, man. It's so frustrating too to like put your energy into a series and then have it get blown at the end. It's like whatever.
Now, it seems like there are several stories that you contributed to your anthologies that felt like they were going to be serials, but they were never continued. And I'll give a few examples. My Little Brother is a Monster from Boosterville, your Book of Monsters. Little Monsters from Book of Monsters 2. And that, of course, that became...
one at a time.
Okay.
Okay, so My Little Brother's a Monster. Again, this is trying to put a spin on things. You know, it's always, my brother's a monster. I mean, you know, my brother, we all hate our little brothers. Maybe we don't know what my little brother's a monster. But so I was taking that idea to play with as a monster thing. So that was a bit of a cliffhanger ending, if I remember correctly, that he's going to turn into a monster again. But I didn't feel the need to continue it. But about 15 years later, I did expand it into a full-length novel called Always October.
Oh, right. Is that available? Is it available?
The publisher didn't do a very good job with it.
Oh.
It's got one of the greatest covers I ever had. But I would. I think you should be able to find it. It's
yeah, I've got it here.
I was looking for it.
Right there, right?
Yeah, that's a good cover. Yeah.
Yeah, and it hits in 2 beats. You see a little bump in there at the bottom, and then you realize there's this set of fangs all over this. So it's a 2-beat cover, which makes it, you look twice at it because it's got this little sort of oh.
That is such a good cover. You're right. I love that.
You don't notice the big one at first, yeah.
That's
right, because
cool.
the bright green, he's almost background color, but the bright green of Little Monster, a little dumpling, draws you right down there. So then the other one, the one that's in Book of Monsters 2.
Monsters of Morley Manor is what it became.
Right, exactly.
And that was
So
great.
I did take that one. I took the 5 episodes there. And the reason I did that, to be honest, was for 2 things. One, I'd written the first short story, and it felt like it was not quite finished, but I knew we were going to be doing one of those every 2 months. So I just said, to be continued. And I thought, because when I was a kid, I used to get a Jack and Jill magazine, and they occasionally ran serials, and I loved them because they would be like part of the story, and then you had to wait a month or 2 for the next part, and then wait a month or 2 for the next part. And I thought it was great, just like continued comics. So we did that as a series, and that's why that book is so weird, because of course I went from Book of Monsters 2 to Book of Ghosts 2 to Book of Aliens 2 to Book of Spine Tingers 2 or whatever it was. So I had to wrench the story in new directions over and over again. It's one of the weirdest books. Well, it's probably the weirdest book I ever wrote. My mother read it and she said, "Bruce, you're getting stranger and stranger."
That's good praise, though. She would know.
It has, it encompasses more genres than almost anything I know of.
Interesting.
Now, what about I, Earthling, with the guy with the kid who has to move with his dad to this other planet because he's a diplomat of some intergalactic, organization or confabulation, and he has like a little, I don't know if it's a genetically engineered or a pygmy panda, a really small
Engineered, yeah. Wow.
It's a handheld panda, and he's worried that he's going to have to give it up for some reason. I definitely felt there was more to tell with that too. Did that ever become anything?
Okay, so 2 things. One, I actually felt that was a completely shaped short story. The kid had to deal with accepting responsibility. At the end, he speaks with the alien. He's made this great tactical error of praising something, in the culture that they're in. His father said to him, "Read this stuff. You've got to study this stuff." And he doesn't, and he makes this mistake of praising something, and the alien gives him the thing, and then he says, "I like that panda," and the kid's supposed to give it to him, and he can't bring himself to do it, and he runs away with the panda on this alien planet, and the alien comes to him, and the kid breaks down and gives it to him, and the alien then hands it back to him and says, "I didn't need to have it. I needed you to give it to me. I needed to know that you would be worthy trading partners." And then he says to him, talks to him about the upshot of it all is, "We let you in, you'll be at home anywhere if you learn to do this." And there's this scene of him looking out at the galaxy of stars, the unfamiliar stars, and sensing that the universe has opened up to him. So he's made the journey. He's made the mistake. He's paid his price. He's come to a new place in his development. So I consider that a fully developed short story that didn't read. Now, certainly you could spin more out of that. You could go on that off there forever. By the way, I am particularly proud of that story because it had the first, and to my knowledge, the only group fart in children's literature.
He passes out from it, yeah.
Yes, he does. They call him, and the kids call him Kilugwan, the delicate one, because that's how they greet you there. So the thing is, that was a perfect example of the thing I was talking about, starting with a laugh or a fart and going someplace very, that's a very, very serious story. But it starts with this raucous scene of the group fart. But to go back to your question, I was approached some years later about, well, not that many years later, about coming up with a proposal for a TV series. And I suggested that as the basis. And they said, that doesn't work because it'd be way, way, way too expensive because you'd have to have all the prosthetics. So I said, well, how about we turn the concept inside out? Same basic idea, but doing 180. The aliens come to us, and so we have one alien kid who, for political reasons on the father's part, the father's the diplomat, is put in middle school in an American public school. And it's the story of a kid who becomes the only purple kid with a Sven Gnutkusher on top of his head. So it's a complete reversal. And then a very odd thing happened. They never picked it up, and the concept was still mine. So my editor at Simon Schuster, where I did the other Alien books, said, well, we need something new. And I sent her this idea. And so they signed it up. But at the same time they were signing up the books, another production company came and said to do them. So we actually developed, I was a sixth grade alien as a book series and a TV series simultaneously. And I would riff off of the writers, and I'd give them my ideas, and they would tell me the characters they needed. So that short story, I Earthling became a 2-year TV series and a 12-book series, because my insane agent got me a 12-book contract for this, which nearly killed me. And they were a dismal failure in terms of finances. They were well reviewed. They had the most awful covers. And I thought, well, that's it. They're dead. They'll never around it because I got a ridiculous advance for them. And then last year, out of the blue, 2 years ago now, the publisher contacted me and said, you know, I was looking at these books that are on our backlist here, and they're like really good and really apt for the time, because it's about immigration, it's about fear of the other, and all the political stuff that I wrote 20 years ago, as with the stuff that I wrote 30 years ago for My Teacher Flamed the Planet, sadly is all appropriate still. You write social criticism, you hope in a way you'll make things better and not be so relevant, but everything is still relevant. So they have reissued, or in the process of reissuing, the entire 12-book series in hardcover and paperback with new funny covers, but I have to say they have their life and energy that the original paperback covers didn't have.
Nice. That's so cool. Oh.
Your question about that short story is one short story, 2 years of TV, and 12 books that are the story idea turned inside out.
That's amazing. How cool is that? Boy, I love that. Seeing the genesis of a project like that. When it comes, it's just amazing. It's so amazing how like one little piece of the creative process feeds into all these other ones. That's really incredible. One question we always like to ask, or at least I like to ask people, is what are you reading right now? Because obviously reading is important to any writer. So what are you reading?
Well, I just finished reading 2 books to consider for recording. And a lot of my reading of fiction is with one eye on, I want to read this book, one eye on, is this a book I should record? That's become harder because as audio has grown, when I started over 25 years ago, it was not that big a deal. And if a book was published and you liked it, you could probably buy the audio rights. And then people started buying the rights earlier and earlier, more people were doing it. So now you have to get in before a book is published, for the most part, before a book is published, to have a chance to get in the audio rights. So I just read one called The Darkening of Dragons. It's a book being imported from the UK. Riffs off the Pied Piper of Hamelin. It's called The Darkness of Dragons in the UK. I got all confused about the title because I was trying to look it up, but they changed it because there already is a book here called The Darkness of Dragons by Tui Sutherland. So they changed the title. And it kind of rambles, but it's got really engaging characters. And yep, that's the Tui Sutherland book. That is not the one that I was reading. Wings of Fire, yeah, it's like a 12-book series.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's by
Tui Sutherland.
No, but Tui
No,
it's extremely popular, but it's not Tui's book that I'm reading or doing.
Okay.
It was called, the UK title of this other book was also A Darkness of Dragons, but when the publisher, Peachtree, decided to bring it here, they had to retitle it because there's only a very, very popular book that would be confused with. You can't copyright a title, but you don't want 2 titles out that are so close to each other. 2 books that are so close to each other with the same title.
Yeah.
So, and then I just read this weekend a book called Of Shore and Sand, which is, I think, a Danish book, but it's just a gorgeously written book about this girl whose father's a lighthouse keeper, and she makes a big mess and has to go live. It's in one aspect, it's very secret garden. She has to go live in this dark old house, and there's a strange thing up in the tower room. But it's also like a follow-up to The Little Mermaid. And it's a beautiful piece of writing. I got completely engaged by it. Nonfiction-wise, I'm listening to an audio, A Distant Mirror, that book about the 14th century, which is fascinating.
Yeah, that's cool. So interesting.
I don't want to derail, but I do have a question. So
I got answers coming out my ears. So it's
yeah.
Fascinating. No, I love listening to all this. Well, so my question is maybe a little bit personal, but I've been thinking about like your presentation, like with your art, is like super fascinating because you've got really interesting covers. You have a lot of engaging themes for a variety of audiences, and you really enjoy the process of writing and sharing this, and so it has quite a reach. But I was wondering, like when I think of my own writing, I often think of it as being very unrefined because I think it captures like a lot of maybe raw emotions, but those emotions are important to the process. But I'm curious about the process of like polishing your work because like you've worked with editors and you've worked with publishers and like you know the ins and outs of it. Like how can you write something that maybe has that polished feel? I don't want to say strictly accessible because like it depends. You know, like there are great books that are not as accessible and they're good. But I'm just wondering about the constant tension between the presentation, which gets people's interest and they can share the enthusiasm. And sometimes if you present something a certain way, more people will be interested, versus also staying true to raw emotion and your experience and like what you're trying to do. Because it sounds like with your process, like it's a little bit of both. Like you write what you want to, you write and with your philosophy and like about kids and like why all of that is super important. But it's also fun, you know, like
yeah,
really
it's marketable.
And I would hesitate to use the word marketable. I know what you mean. I only wonder because I don't know what the tension is, because marketable is good. I mean, it's nice to have people that can engage, and I want to look at it more from the perspective of polished, to where it has like that feel. But because part of me has been like, maybe I shouldn't sacrifice that raw edge, but I don't know. I mean,
okay. So I think one way to talk about the binary of what you're discussing is it's a matter of art and craft. And art is that raw emotion you're pouring into it. Craft is what you use to make that emotion and that rawness accessible to the reader, to draw them in. And those are learnable skills. Skills in terms of how you present dialogue, of how you balance dialogue versus prose descriptions, of how you trim away stuff. And to keep that raw emotion, sometimes restraint is better than, because it leaves the reader a place to come into it. I just listened to another audiobook, The Queen's Gambit, which was a very successful TV show.
Oh, yeah.
TV series. And there's an amazing passage where, toward the end, where the author's style is very terse. And I said to my closest friend, who's a writing friend, I said, he makes Hemingway look wordy, like a jabbermouth. So it's very concise. But the main character, Beth, the chess whiz, having achieved at a high level, goes back to visit her old school where the janitor had taught her to play chess. And he's dead at this point. She's gone back for the funeral. She goes down to the room where he learned to play chess. And she turns and she sees a wall covered with all pictures and articles about her. And you take that in. And then she goes back to the car, and her friend says, "Did you find what you're looking for?" And she says, "Yes." And there's a couple of paragraphs. And then out of the blue, he says, "And she didn't stop crying until they got back to Lexington." And he went, "Whoa. It is such a concise way to convey so much emotional power." That's not for me. I tend to spill my guts more on the page than that. But it is a matter of, I do a lot of craft teaching, a lot of craft lectures. One thing I like to talk about is the first draft process. there's an apocryphal story, and sometimes it's an angel, sometimes it's a horse. But Michelangelo's friends asked him how he carved a horse. Hey, Mike, how do you get a horse out of that block of marble? And his response was, I look at the marble and cut away everything that's not horse.
Mm-hmm.
And the first draft is your block of marble. Now, Michelangelo.
That's exactly what I say.
Yeah.
I say.
It's like because they got marble. Your first draft is your marble. So you don't have that block of marble stuff. You've got to get it out of you before you can start getting it right.
That's exactly what I say.
So
Would it be fair? Sorry, go ahead.
no.
Well,
Go ahead.
because I am thinking of polishing it in terms of like also in terms of the publication avenue. So I've self-published many works and I'm very proud of them, but I always think about polishing it and like making it as good as it can be. And I guess what I wonder is like, is there a way to tap into that process of being able to know what to do with that first draft to make it sing, basically? Like, because my thought is like, I feel like my rawness has been part of my presentation, but I'm always trying to like work on craft, which you said is extremely important. And I've gotten to a point to where I think I'm more willing to treat my work like a block of marble, but I guess I'm just trying to get in that mindset of like being able to carve, as you were saying.
Um,
And so self-publishing is a little bit more rough just because it's great, but it's harder to get that polished feel sometimes.
okay, so here's a couple things I would say. Well, first, are you writing for adults or kids?
Adults.
Okay.
Most.
I know less about the options of
Okay.
courses or of craft conferences. In my
Okay.
world, the children's book world, the SCBWI does conferences all over the country, and the craft is always an element of the choosing them. So we have an active mission of teaching craft. There are probably craft conferences that you can find, but there's also just reading. Look at right here to my right-hand side.
I love that book.
Editing for fiction writers.
Okay.
Beautiful book.
There's a
Self-editing for
lot-
fiction writers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Story by Robert McKee is a great book. It's written for screenwriters, but I found it very, very useful. I took his class twice, and it impacted. The first evening, I was thinking, why am I here? I know all this stuff. But by the end of the weekend, I'd taken 40 pages of notes, and started using this stuff the very next morning on My Teacher Glows in the Dark. And I can point to things in that book that's the book. It's a great book.
Okay.
Full of craft. McKee is full of himself and he teaches. It's kind of like you got to get past his ego, but the book is just the essence of what he has to teach you. Stephen King's book on writing, I think it's just called On Writing, is a really terrific book too. And it's interesting because he begins with a foreword that's autobiographical. That's pretty funny. It's laugh out loud funny. Then he does a lot on craft. And then to the end, there's a very serious autobiographical piece about how he came back to writing after he had that near fatal auto accident. And you may remember he was hit by a car. It'll have you in tears. So it's I think a terrific handbook for a writer, both in it gives you advice and it also demonstrates what's right. It's not. He doesn't say, "Here, I'm going to demonstrate these tactics," but you see what he does, and as you read the book, you can see, okay, this is the tactics going on here.
Yeah.
So I have a question on that I'm like dying to ask now, because you had mentioned the binary that I mentioned, and I don't mean to pit them against each other, but maybe what I've done in my mindset is conflate something like raw emotion or like I've associated that with being like less polished. And I'm just trying to find the balance of that because like Neil Gaiman has described how you should be honest in your writing, and so like if that's what I'm doing, I'm already there. But craft is obviously important still. So I'm just wondering, maybe I've conflated them in a way I shouldn't, but I don't know a way around that yet, and I'm still learning. But because I do think craft is important, and I always want to work on that, and I think I've taken it more seriously over the past couple years because I really thought about what I can do with my writing, and I want it to be able to speak to people.
Yes,
So,
you want to be heard. I mean, that's the point of doing this, and the point of craft is to help you make that emotional material more available.
yeah, okay.
Totally.
Because I do feel like I got a little bit biased from some of the classes I took in college, because I think they always emphasize like marketability as not being true or edgy.
Yeah, so it's like
But-
the
but I totally
sellouts.
internalize that without meaning to, and
I think college writing classes tend to be toxic.
Yeah.
I know people who did not write for years after their college writing class.
Wow.
yeah,
The model I think is very faulty. Many classes are based on the students tearing each other down.
yeah,
Yep.
I looked into getting an MFA in writing at Syracuse University, which has a very good program. Mary Carr teaches there. Tobias Wolff was teaching there when I looked into it.
nice.
Now, I'd already published 3 books at that point. I went up for the interview, had a nice interview with Tobias Wolff, and turned around the other direction. Because it was clear that they didn't think what I did was real writing. They were going to teach me how to write exquisitely crafted stories that I would publish in small Midwestern journals that paid in copies. And that's kind of a bitter way to put it, but I don't think college writing classes are really healthy for the most part.
Okay.
I totally agree.
Yeah, I think I was lucky in the college class that I got, which was at Iowa State. So we had basically 3 major assignments. First one was like just write a regular story, just under a certain amount of pages. The second one was we had to like tell a multimedia story. We couldn't like just write it on paper. We had to like tell it through things like a slideshow, through videos, something like that. And
That's an interesting assignment.
And then the third one was another written assignment, but from the to incorporate some of the lessons we got from doing the multimedia story. So a lot of people's third story was like a lot more experimentally crafted and a bit more out there.
That's interesting.
That's a very interesting assignment. I like that. And I should say that I had good experience with I was in a teaching college, my final years, I was getting my teaching degree, and I took children's writing there. And the children's writing field is a kinder, gentler world. So those classes were very useful to me. But in my first writing class, I placed them, it was at Duke that first year, the year I brought in Stan Lee. And it was clear I didn't belong in that writing class. There were about 20 people. They all wanted to be Faulkner or Hemingway or F. Scott Fitzgerald when they grew up. I wanted to be the next Edgar Rice Burroughs. Or Stan Lee. So it wasn't a comfortable fit for me. And it just felt that there was an urge to be pretentious there.
Well, but what I like about what you're emphasizing is it's the writing. Like that's what's important. It's not necessarily the like the writing itself, because yes, you care about the presentation, but it's less about this attitude that like the writing can't just be enjoyable, or the writing can't achieve some kind of other function outside of like this pretension you've described.
Yes,
that's powerful. Yeah.
Phoenix, have you ever like just written a book like just for fun?
So that's what I'm doing now. Although I think I got too ambitious because it's 3 volumes and.
That's that one.
But it's literally the book that I've been writing with that in mind. Like this is escape, like popcorn. Like I want popcorn and soda. Like
good.
Cool.
So yeah,
I think that's the way to learn.
But that's why I find like your book's exciting because it. Yeah.
Okay, because we've been talking about that, but that you can have both. You start with the popcorn, and I don't want to use a food analogy, but it's you can have both.
Yeah.
If you start to be profound, you're going to be pretentious. If you start to tell a story and let what you believe as a human being flow into the story, then you're going to be universal and profound. Or have the chance to be.
Well, I love the analogy of being more concise than Hemingway.
One author I like to point to is Jim Thompson. Have you ever read any of his work?
Oh yeah.
I have not.
You mentioned him.
I mean, he was like in his day. Oh yeah, that's an amazing
I'm
book.
on it.
He was considered like in his day sort of just a dime store crime novelist, but I think The Killer Inside Me is one of the best examinations of like the fractured American psyche that I've ever read.
That's cool. Really interesting.
What's it called? I'm going to make a note of that.
It's The Killer Inside Me. It's an interesting book. I wanted to ask us. I've got actually a couple of questions, and I know we've had you captive here for a while, so I appreciate you sticking with us. Just a few more. First, I guess, like, would you consider yourself? This hadn't even occurred to me until we were talking about this, but would you consider yourself like a pulp fiction author a little bit? I mean, would you say that like Nancy Drew kind of falls into the pulp fiction line, and that these packagers books fall into kind of pulp fiction? Or do you think pulp fiction and YA and children's books are separate kind of?
Okay. I mentioned packagers. Early in my career, I published 3 books with prestigious hardcover publishers. And then because publishing is a business that devours its young, and to feed my family, I started to work for packagers, where the first work I did for them was I saw that 2 packagers were starting lines of teen occult thrillers.
Ooh, cool.
And so I had an agent at the time, and I got a new situation. I don't want to tell this whole story because it's long and embarrassing, but I promised to write 3 200-page books in 3 months.
Oh my God.
Oh, wow.
I didn't quite make it, but I was close. It looked like my eyes looked like piss holes in the snow every morning. But then, but they're only looking for a certain level. They were pulp fiction. But my goal in each case, and this is, I think, you keep your artistic self alive, was to write a better book than they were expecting, a better book than they were paying me for. They were looking for a certain level of enjoyable read. I wanted to do more.
Yeah.
And that's why I think that I feel good about those books. Actually, when the series went out of print, most people just let theirs go. I aggressively went and got the rights back and rewrote them. Those are 4 of the ones that I rewrote, Regina. And tried to, and actually we'll probably rewrite them for another round and self-publish them. Because Phoenix, I'm doing some self-publishing to bring back my own backlist as well.
Cool.
But the goal was, and I think this is how you keep yourself alive artistically, was to do better, was to do more than I was being paid for. When I realized what I promised to do, to write these 3 books, and there was like 5 different months, but they were like overlapping dates. And so I called a junior at the time, and I said, here's what I've done. And her husband had the best thing to say about it. He said, well, it won't do much for his art, but it'll do wonders for his craft. But I think he was not entirely correct in that, because you cannot improve your craft without it redounding to your art as well. And I learned a lot in doing those, a great learning experience. But every one of them is a book that I stand by even today.
That's cool. Very interesting. I think that's great. And I think, I think it's wonderful to be able to, write such lighthearted books, but that are so at the same time very, dark and intense, and deal with such, really kind of universal themes that I think appeal to both children and adults, which is just, very cool, very nice. It's interesting. There are, I think, a lot more kind of packager type situations functioning right now in publishing, the way there's these combined presses and all these different publishers. So it's strange. So my next question, I guess, is this is just kind of a silly question. How do you get like some of your names? Like in the There's Nothing Under the Bed, the evil guy at the end here has such an interesting name. That's like, yeah, like how do you get these great names? Or the Amulet of Doom, the old lady at the beginning, all these characters have such good names.
These are good answers. One is just collect them as you go through your life. 2 is a lot of people a lot of writers get a naming dictionary which they're made mostly for new parents, but they explain the meanings of names, so you can get a name to match. But the third, and I think this goes to what you're asking about more, things like Westicks, is that I think as a writer, your words are your tools, but they should also be your toys. And you should take pleasure in playing with the language and playing with sound. So I try things out, and I'll sometimes just screwing around with syllables and sounds. But then they can then also illuminate the character in a way. Now, here's an example of one-handed things. Broxholm in my Teachers and Alien books. I have a friend named Scott Broxholm. I said, hey, Scott, can I use your name for an alien? He said, yeah, sure, why not? Because I just thought it was a cool name.
Yeah.
But in the Unicorn Chronicles series, there are two invented creatures. One is a small, jabbery creature that runs around, chatters a lot, moves very fast, jumps from place to place. The other is a large, sort of semi-bear-like creature who speaks very slowly and is very powerful. Now, without attaching the names to one or the other, I'll tell you that they are the Dimblethumb and the Squidgem. And I think you can probably figure out which name goes with which creature. And if you take them apart, now, I didn't do this analysis when I did it, I just knew they were right when I got them. Look at the word Dimblethumb. It's 3 slow syllables. Dim, which is M is a slow letter. Bull, thumb. Thumb is the shortest, smallest, stockiest, thickest, and slowest of the fingers, the digits. Dimblethumb. It's a name that demands to be said slowly. Squidgem. Squidgem says, say me fast. That in your throat. You can't draw that out without going Squidgem.
Speaking Arabic.
Yeah. So the sound fits the sense.
Interesting. I love that. Yeah, it's the realization of the beingness. I like that. That's very interesting. I guess my last question that I just am really curious about is like, because your books are so connected to childhood, and I know you said that you like knew at the age of 17 you wanted to write, but like, when did you write your first story? Was it in elementary school? Was it in middle school? Do you remember what it was?
When I was in 6th grade.
Wow.
My teacher had us write all year long.
Cool.
Now that was it was not the way writing was generally taught. She was part of she was using one of the newer schools, I think, what was it called? Whole language, I think she was what she was working toward. But she was on the right track, because the only way you learn to write is by writing. You don't learn it by doing exercises, stripping answers. She had us write all year long. I failed at it all year long because I didn't do well at writing the prompts. At the end of the year, you said, we're going to write a short story. You got, I know it was an extended period of time, like 4 or 5 weeks, I think. We worked on it in class. We knew she took it seriously because she gave it class time, which was serious. But she didn't tell us what it had to be about. Whatever, you had to come out of your own head. And when I wrote that story, which was in some ways a ripoff of Sheila Burnford's Incredible Journey, the book filmed twice by Disney about the cat and 2 dogs that have to make a cross-country trip.
Yeah.
I got very symbolic, and I had a lion and a lamb making a cross-country trip. So it was not bad in 6th grade.
Talking about Homer Bound there.
Yeah, that's
Milo and Otis.
I think
okay.
That's
different.
Milo knows is like that, yeah. So that was the first time I thought I'd like to be a writer. I thought, wow, I can do this. That was pretty good. But you change your mind when you're a kid. You want to do this, you want to do that. You're going to be an astronaut, you're going to be a grave digger. I wanted to be an astronaut. I was a grave digger.
I worked in the mortuary industry.
Literally. No, I dug graves.
Yeah, that's cool.
And I was incredibly successful. It's the only job where I've had 100% success. Nobody ever
no complaints. Yep. I used to work for a mortuary, and we always said it was the business that you'll always have clients, man.
Yes. It's it's a showstopper for your writer's bio in the back of a book.
It is. It's so true. It is.
So
That's
I kept
cool.
going back to it. By the time I was 16 or 17, I knew that's what I really wanted to do.
That's so cool. That's awesome. And we're so glad you've done it, Mr. Coville.
Before we do wrap up, I had a few questions too. I've been trying to get a word in. But yeah.
Sorry. Go on.
I'm glad that everybody's just attacking you from every angle, because
We're very excited to have you.
Yeah, as you can tell.
Very
Everybody.
excited.
Gregor, in fact, only reason he left is because his headset was dying. So
No.
he was interested in this. Why did it take so long for you to write a follow-up to the Dragonslayers, unless that's a reprint? And also, I guess, talk a little bit about the Magic Shop series as well, because I feel like, we ought to, fit that in the Monsters Ring, Jennifer Murdley's Toad, Jeremy Thatcher Dragon Hatcher, and how different of a feeling it was writing those as opposed to the others. So I guess the Dragonslayer question first. And then...
No, I think you've got the Dragonslayers. I don't want to correct you in public on your own podcast, but I never did a sequel to the Dragonslayers. You're thinking of Goblins in the Castle, I think.
Okay.
Oh,
Goblins in the
yeah,
Castle.
Goblins on the Prowl. Goblins on the Prowl.
Right.
Yes.
That's a sequel to Goblins in the Castle, and it was 23 years. Goblins in the Castle is a personal favorite of mine. It's one I wrote early, but then it took 10 years to get it right. When I finally got it right, because the character Igor is my half-mad twin brother, who used to appear in my class in elementary school every year on Halloween and chase the kids around with his teddy bear. So I have this personal connection to Goblins in the Castle. It's also
cool.
very much the kind of book I thought I was going to be writing when I started. If I were to say, out of all these books, what's most like what I thought I'd be writing? I think it's probably Goblins in the Castle. And it didn't need a sequel, but after a while I felt like I wanted to go back to it. That's the first cover, and that's gorgeous done. That's one where
That's such a cool cover.
when I did the sequel, they hired an artist to do a re-release of that with a new cover, but it just doesn't pull the plow the way that first cover did. So
Nice. Pretty nifty right there.
yeah, it's pretty cool, but just didn't work the way that first one did.
Yeah, that typesetting on the first one is so perfect.
Yeah. But I had fun writing, but it took me a long time. It was a really hard book to write. And it's a little bit hard to go back to where you were. So I am actually working on a book that started out to be kind of a sequel to that. There was a character I had to cut out that I'm writing a book about now, but it will be disconnected from that series. Now, the Magic Shop. The Magic Shop. The Monsters Ring was the first book in the Magic Shop. And it was my first published novel. It was before I did those packaged books. And I loved the Magic Shop. I didn't want to let go of it. And when I talked to the editor about doing a sequel, and she said, no, the book hasn't sold well enough to justify a sequel. But I didn't want to let go of the shop. So my next thought was to do a collection of short stories that all started at the shop. And I sat down, I think it was October of 1982, because I think it was the same year that book was published, maybe the year after. I made a list of about a dozen things you could buy in the Magic Shop. And I'm not good at short stories because I tend to get carried away. So the first one I tried to write was The Dragon's Egg. Well, that became Jeremy Thatcher Dragon Hatcher, which is way longer than a short story.
Yeah.
The second one I tried to write was Jennifer Murdley's Toad, which was just, I can't remember the working title of it was, but again, it became a full-length novel. I have done 2 short stories based on this ideas, but out of those 12 ideas that I created that one October afternoon, 4 became full-length novels and 2 became significant short stories.
Wow, that's cool. How awesome.
Okay, so now here's a question for you. And we'll probably wrap up with this because it's way past my bedtime now. Do you know how to pronounce the name of the shop?
What's that?
The name of the shop.
No, it's been a while.
Okay, well, let me tell you the spelling.
The
It's spelled Elives.
Elives.
Elvis.
Yes.
Yeah, it's
I get all kinds of Eloise, E-Lives. E-Lives is actually correct, and here's why. Because here's a word game. The shop is run by an old man, which makes him a Mr., which makes him Mr. E-Lives. Or if you talk fast as I do, it's Mr. E-Lives. And if you just, yes, his name is Mystery Lives.
Oh, I love it. That's
pretty cool.
That's a cool little. See, that's what I love. I want to know like the secret puns behind these names and how all this stuff. That's great.
It goes farther. At the bottom of this shop, there's S.H.E. Lives proprietor, which reads S.H. She lives. She lives because he is doing moon magic. He's an agent of the moon goddess.
That's perfect.
So we got two going on there. Mr. E lives, and she lives as an agent of the moon goddess.
That's cool. That's perfect.
Wow.
That's great. I love how deeply you think of your work, and I love everything about how you have just reached out to children for years and really taught us all to love wordplay and horror and funny horror, and you're exactly what kids need in an author, my friend. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, we very much appreciate it.
I've long said that as a writer, you go through 3 stages. You want to publish, then you want to be read, 4 stages actually. Then you want to be loved, and then you hope you'll be remembered. So that you guys remember the books when you were young really means a great deal to me. So sort of it confirms, affirms, justifies the career. So thank you for that.
I couldn't possibly forget you. You were a friend to me in my childhood and my middle grade years. Really.
I love knowing that. I truly do.
Yeah. No, you're a treasure.
I'm going to ask on Regina's behalf because we spent like 4 weeks talking about going through these anthologies, and she kept bringing up "Drawing Down the Moon" by Jenny Lee.
Oh, just drawing the moon. Yeah.
And do you know if she ever does podcasts? Because I think that.
Yes, Jenny's got quite a good career going. I think she'd be delighted to do a podcast with you.
All right.
Yeah, we want to. We'll let her know you said that and peer pressure to come on.
Well, if you need contact info for her, let me know. I can give you contact info for her.
Yeah, that'd be great.
But you can probably find her on Facebook too. She's pretty active on Facebook.
Fantastic.
No, that is Drawing the Moon is probably in all those 12 books. Drawing the Moon is probably the strangest and most haunting of all the stories. It's weird in the best way, and I think that really rises to being a work of art too. It's a really a lot of the stories. I mean, I don't think there's a clinker in there. I wouldn't put it in if I didn't think it was good.
It's so well curated.
That story resides at a kind of different level. It is.
Yeah. It's like it's not even a story for kids or adults. It's like a story for ghosts of aliens who are trying to learn about humans. It's such an interesting story. And yeah, man, you cultivated these collections so well. I mean, I will always remember starting the introduction to this while sitting in my father's cubicle and being like, oh yeah, okay, you think you're gonna spook me, Mr. Coville? And then like 2 nights later I'm lying in bed reading these books like, oh my god, I don't want to sleep. Bravo, sir, bravo, you're a hero. Well, thank you so much for coming on. We truly, truly appreciate it. And I can't thank you enough. This was a great experience. Thank you so much.
It was an honor.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you for writing.
You clearly had done your homework, and it was very enjoyable to talk to you. Thank you for inviting me.
Good. Thank you.
It's
Thank
great
you.
talking to you too,
Good
man.
night.
Hi guys.
Bye.
Good luck with your own work.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate
Yeah,
it.
and thank you for all the stories you've given the world. Jeremy, do you want to kick him out here so he can go to bed? Yeah. Get out of here, Mr. Coville. We're done with you.
I'll probably close out with like a monologue or something. I don't know. But yeah, it was an honor, and wow, I never thought I'd get the chance to speak with you directly. You know, You were my introduction to Joe R. Lansdale with the Fat Man. You swore on a dead cat, huh?
That is one weird story too.
Yes.
Yeah.
That one. I mean, 0 Hour by Ray Bradbury. Bradbury is not one that often spooks me, but that one got to me because it seemed that there was an underlayer of menace, with it. The imaginary friend and all the kids, see him. His name's Drill, and they're like conspiring against their parents, and the parents start getting paranoid. To Serve Man, you curated that by Damon Knight. That was a Twilight Zone episode at one point. And I think you made those stories mean more by curating them in such a way. And I'm glad to know that Always October is a continuation of My Little Brother's a Monster, because I just bought that. So I'm looking forward to that too.
Good. Well, I hope you'll enjoy it. It's very different in some ways. I changed the main character's name. There's all kinds of stuff there, but it's I loved going back to that world. There was a lot to explore there.
That's cool. All right, Jeremy, hang up with him so the poor man can go to bed. That's what I was trying to tell you to do in the first place.
Do you want me to
just boot him from the thing so he doesn't have to worry about it.
Have a good night, sir. And
have a good night.
Yes, thank you very much for coming. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you. Oh, such a treasure. That was wonderful. I was so happy to have him on. Gosh.
That was pretty great, yeah.
Yeah, that was... I feel like we made it, man.
Benevolent grandfatherly presence, a sagely figure,
Genuinely nice guy.
He's not concerned about, oh no, I can't be seen talking to these people because